Hey guys, and welcome to week 4. First of all, I want to say you're doing wonderful work, so keep it up. Next, I have just a few quick reminders. First and foremost, if you're not submitting your discussion post to the weekly assignment link, I don't have anywhere to post your grade. So please be sure you're submitting it to both the discussion forum and the assignment link in the assignment folder. Next, as a reminder, I'm moving the due date for your original discussion post each week. It will now be due on the Sunday of each respective week, except for our final week in class. If you have questions on this, please read the announcement from last week or don't hesitate to send me an email. Next reminder, remember that we have 2 different types of discussions in this class, and they're identified each week as one or the other. The first is a formal discussion post, which we only have a few weeks out of our class. We practice formal posts in part to make sure that you're prepared for the midterm and final written essay exams, which are both formal in nature. One of the other reasons is to generally prepare you for college-level writing. Formal writing is much like it sounds. It's formal in nature. So you should avoid colloquialisms, any juvenile affectations, but you must also write in third-person formal language, using an objective perspective, meaning you should not address yourself at all. Reflections, on the other hand, are more informal. For reflections, you should still focus on grammar and spelling, of course, but you're welcome to use your own point of view, and you're definitely encouraged to offer your perspective. I always want you to look for aha moments, finding connections between the story and the world as you know it. Or between the character and another character in literature, and so on. What you should not do is rely heavily on personal experiences. For example, if this character is much like your cousin, your reader probably won't be able to make any connections because your reader doesn't know your cousin, if that makes sense. This week we're doing reflections. This week, we will also focus on realism and naturalism, and I love these 2 literary forms. I would say it takes a little time to essentially acquire a taste for realism and naturalism because they don't follow the pattern we're generally raised on in fiction. There's action, a problem, a pinnacle to the story, and some sort of resolution. Naturalism and realism don't follow this pattern because that's not really how life works. Realism, as its name implies, endeavors to bring to life realistic characters and scenarios. Realism is character-driven with little focus to a plot, or at least to the type of plot with which we're familiar. Realism is sometimes dark, sometimes satirical, sometimes comical, but I would say the major tone or mood to realism is dissonance. If you're familiar with music, you know that musical dissonance happens when notes clash, when there's a lack of harmony. And the same is true when we talk about dissonance in these pieces. There's a tension or a clash between the elements of the story, and this often leaves the reader with uncomfortable emotions. This is something you are likely to see in Catherine Mansfield's Miss Brill. I first read this story in high school myself more than 15 years ago, and I brought it back for this class because it stood out to me that much at the time, much like The Lottery did. As a side note, we're not reading The Lottery in class this time simply for lack of time, but I do recommend it, especially if you like stories that challenge you on an emotional and on an intellectual level. When I first read The Hunger Games, I immediately remembered The Lottery. It's on page 431 of our textbook. But I digress. Miss Brill continues to stand out to me because it leaves me feeling genuinely heartbroken each time I read it in just a few pages. There's more here than meets the eye. Mansfield is extremely particular about each nuance, each movement, each feeling, each sight appearing before our protagonist. When you read it, I want you to focus on who this woman is, because even though this is fiction, you know there's a Miss Brill in probably every other neighborhood, in every town, in every country of the world. And this next sentence is important. I want you to think about what has happened in her life to lead her to experiencing this day as she does. There are so many clues within the story, but let your critical thought take you on your own analytical journey and have fun with it. I want you to let this sit for a day or two if you can after you read it, to let your ideas marinate before you start writing. This piece is shorter, so there's a balance between this one and the next one, which is a little bit longer. So let's move on to naturalism. Naturalism usually includes several specific elements. There's often an inherent pessimism to each piece. The tone or mood is often dark, and death or serious trials will typically occur. There's a strong notion of fate or destiny. There's a causal plot, and the reader is often placed in the scene essentially after it has started, or in the middle. The setting is also super significant. Symbolism is usually used. Third-person narration is usually used, and often in a limited way, meaning the narrator doesn't pretend to know what the protagonist is thinking. And finally, men and women are often their most animalistic selves, reverting to survival mode. You will absolutely see most of these things in the classic story we're reading this week, Jack London's To Build a Fire. Again, this one is a little longer and a little slower at first, so don't read it when you're tired. But once you get into it, it's really fascinating and it's beautifully written. Try to imagine yourself in this situation, lost in the freezing cold wilderness. How would you survive? What would you feel? Who would you think about? This character is not unlike some of the people we all know, yet every one of his qualities exists on the next level. He's a very simple man, but it's his simplicity that makes him and his story so complex and so fabulous. I hope you'll enjoy these stories. I hope you'll enjoy writing your reflections and reading others' reflections, and just have a wonderful week. Let me know if you guys have questions. Thank you.